Hello again. I have seen a lot of conspiracy theories voiced here on this channel in the comments to the effect that large-scale immigration is part of some sinister plan to flood Europe with people from Africa and Asia and so weaken or destroy the white race. I'm dubious about this idea, one version of which is known as the Kalergi plan, and always seems to be tied in somehow with the Jews. Other people have mentioned, usually Jews, the Rothschild, Barbara Specter, I think, various other people. There always seems to be a master plan being put into place, and immigration ties in somehow to that. I find it far more likely that the failure to act on what is obviously a terrible thing for Britain in particular is motivated by a simple desire of politicians not to lose their cushy jobs. I said the other day that immigration actually works to the advantage often of middle class people, and that the real losers are the working class. That is, I think, one reason why no government over the last 40 or 50 years has done anything to stem the flow into the country. But there is another factor too, and this is to do with the very nature of democracy. Politicians, and especially those in government, know that anything they do must show good results in less than 5 years. That's the longest it can possibly be to the next election. If they embark upon a project which will be of immeasurable benefit to the nation, but will take 10 or 20 years to bring advantages to people, then this will be a complete waste of time. It won't help them get re-elected in 4 or 5 years. In fact, if the good which results from this idea is only seen in 20 years' time, then it's altogether possible that it will be the opposition which reaps the electoral benefits of the thing, which would be disastrous. The chief concern of a government in democracy is hanging on and winning the next election. How does this affect immigration? Boris Johnson will have to go to the country in no more than 3 years' time. He wants to do things which people will like and benefit from in the next couple of years. It's vital that he does that, or he was going to get voted out at the next election. He doesn't care what happens in 5 years because the election would have been held by then. Here's a real life example, and this is relevant to immigration. We really need more nurses, doctors and staff in care homes. Let's think for a moment about the question of doctors. Now, the obvious and sensible thing for us to do would be to train more British doctors in this country rather than hiring foreigners. Almost all patients would prefer to see a British doctor rather than a foreign one. The difficulty is that training a doctor takes around 5 or 6 years from the age of 18. That means that even if the Prime Minister kicked off a massive expansion of medical schools in this country, training students who were born in Britain to be doctors, it would be 6 years or so before the first of them would qualify. That would mean that Boris Johnson would go into the next election not having provided the National Health Service with any more doctors. All he would be able to give would be assurances that things would be a lot better in a few years. That's not a vote-winning strategy. People want to have seen practical results after a government's been in power for 5 years, not just a load of promises. Here's another strategy. Instead of long-term plans for training more British doctors, why not hire a few thousand Filipinos and Nigerians instead? And then you can announce, as you are campaigning in the next general election, that you have increased the number of doctors in the NHS by that many. Guess which of those two strategies Boris Johnson will take? The same principle applies to workers picking fruit and vegetables in East Anglia. It is absolutely mad to have a labour force consisting of Lithuanians and Romanians when there are plenty of young people on the dole in those areas. And let's face it, picking fruit is not something you need any particular skills or qualifications from. Any young person on the dole can undertake it. It would be quite possible to modify the benefit system to encourage English workers to do those jobs instead. The next election, though, is in less than 3 years, and it would take longer than that to fix a universal credit system. In the meantime, there might be shortages of fruit and veg while things are being adjusted. That's what people will notice at election time, not the efforts being made to deal with immigration. Much easier simply to allow more foreigners to come into the country and do all that agricultural work in Cambridgeshire and Norfolk. Again, guess which of those strategies the current administration is likely to be adopting before the next election in 3 years? It's like this with everything relating to immigration, whether legal or illegal. Sorting out the problems would take more than 3 years, and the benefits of the changes might not be visible before the next election. Of course, if Boris Johnson and his cronies actually cared about the country, they would go ahead anyway and do these things for the good of the nation. But of course, they don't really care at all. Immigration doesn't really affect them, except in a good way, providing them with cheap workers. And if that means that ordinary people's lives are adversely affected, well, then so be it. It's not going to lose some votes. A lot of the people who really object to immigration, they live on council estates and in rough inner city areas. Those people are usually going to vote Labour anyway, so there's no point currying favour with them. The same applies to old people too. They will vote the same way they have all their lives, so there's no point in worrying if their lives are made miserable either. They're either going to carry on voting Tory or voting Labour. There's no point doing anything for them. Cutting down immigration would be perfectly simple if any government really wished to do it. But while they're always keeping one eye on the calendar and thinking about the next general election, then nothing will be done. I sometimes think it would be no bad thing to have a strong leader in charge for 10 or 15 years who did not worry about elections and could just get on and do things without the fear of being turfed out after a few years.